Commander Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of New Horizons Station, watching the endless dance of ships moving through the galactic trade routes. The massive space station floated in the heart of Federation space, serving as humanity's main diplomatic outpost among the stars. For nearly 200 years, humans had been proud members of the Galactic Federation, working alongside 11 other species to maintain peace across thousands of worlds. Jake had spent his entire career as a diplomat, following in the footsteps of generations of humans who had earned respect as the galaxy's mediators. When other species fought, humans talked them through their problems. When trade disputes arose, humans found fair solutions. When conflicts threatened to tear apart the delicate balance of galactic civilization, humans stepped in to restore peace. The Federation was a marvel of cooperation. Each species contributed their unique gifts to the whole. The Vortani, with their reptilian strength and engineering genius, built the great space stations and maintained the hyperspace routes. The crystalline Nexari served as living computers, processing vast amounts of data at impossible speeds. The gaseous Etherians floated between worlds, carrying messages faster than any machine could transmit them. The aquatic depths brought wisdom from their deep ocean worlds, while the insectoid collective offered the power of perfect unity. Humanity's role had always been less clear. They were decent at everything, but masters of nothing. Other species joked that humans were useful because they could talk to anyone, understand any perspective, and find middle ground where none seemed to exist. Jake had always taken pride in this reputation, even if it sometimes felt like being the galaxy's eternal middle child. The first sign of trouble came during what should have been a routine morning briefing. Jake was reviewing trade agreements with the Outer Rim colonies when his communication panel started flashing urgent red warnings. The Etherian communication network, which connected every major world in the Federation, had gone completely silent. At first, Jake thought it might be a technical problem. The Etherians were proud beings, and their communication network was considered the most reliable system in the galaxy. But as minutes turned to hours, the silence spread. Entire star systems stopped responding to calls. Emergency beacons began activating across the Outer Rim territories. Jake rushed to the station's command center, where other diplomats and military officers were gathering around holographic displays showing the Federation's territory. Red zones were spreading across the map like a disease, marking systems that had gone dark. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Something was moving through the Outer Rim, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Captain Reed, the station's military commander, was coordinating with the few scout ships that had managed to escape the affected areas. The reports they brought back were all the same and all horrible. Entire worlds had been stripped clean, their cities reduced to empty shells, their population simply gone. The attackers left behind planets that looked like bones picked clean by some cosmic predator. The survivors called them the Devourers, and their descriptions made Jake's blood run cold. Massive machines that seemed to absorb everything they touched, converting matter and energy into more of themselves. They moved through space like a living storm, consuming everything in their path and growing stronger with each world they destroyed. Jake listened to the desperate transmissions from the Outer Rim. A Vortani mining colony reported that the attackers seemed to learn from every defense, adapting to new weapons and strategies within hours. A Nexari research station sent frantic data showing that the Devourers weren't just destroying, they were studying, analyzing, and incorporating the technology and knowledge of everything they consumed. The Federation Council convened an emergency session within hours of the first reports. Representatives from all 12 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, their usual diplomatic calm replaced by barely controlled panic. Jake took his place at the human delegation table, feeling smaller than ever as he looked around at the galaxy's greatest leaders. The Vortani military commander General Thorn was the first to speak. His scaled face was grim as he outlined the Federation's defensive capabilities. The Vortani could fortify their worlds, turning entire planets into impregnable fortresses. Their engineering skills were legendary, and their defensive technologies had never been breached. Admiral Coral of the Depths offered her species bioships, living vessels that could adapt and evolve during combat. The aquatic beings had developed warfare as an art form in their deep ocean trenches, and their ships fought with organic intelligence that no machine could match. Queen Zara of the Collective promised the power of her numberless swarms. The insectoid species could field armies in the billions, each warrior perfectly coordinated with the whole. They had never lost a battle through sheer force of numbers and absolute unity. One by one, each species offered their greatest strengths to the defense of the Federation. The crystalline Nexari would coordinate all information and communications. The gaseous Etherians would scout and provide intelligence. The plant-like gardeners would supply biological weapons. Every species had something vital to contribute. When it came time for humanity to make their offer, Jake felt the weight of every gaze in the chamber. What could humans contribute that would match the fortress worlds of the Vortani or the endless armies of the Collective? Humanity had always been the diplomats, the peacekeepers, the ones who solved problems with words instead of weapons. Jake stood slowly, feeling inadequate next to the military might being assembled around him. Humanity offers our hospital ships and diplomatic vessels, he said, his voice sounding weak even to his own ears. We can provide medical support and coordinate communication between the fleet elements. There was a moment of awkward silence. Jake could see the disappointment in some faces, the barely hidden frustration in others. Humanity's contribution to the greatest military effort in galactic history was a few medical ships and the promise to help everyone talk to each other. Within days, the greatest armada in Federation history was assembled. Thousands of ships from 11 species formed a magnificent fleet that stretched across entire star systems. The Vortani contributed their massive dreadnoughts, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. The depths brought their organic bioships, beautiful and deadly as deep-sea predators. The collective swarm vessels moved in perfect formation, creating patterns of light against the darkness of space. Humanity's contribution looked pathetic by comparison. A single hospital ship and 2 diplomatic vessels joined the great fleet, tiny specks among the titans of war. Jake watched from the command bridge of the diplomatic ship Harmony as the armada prepared to depart for the Krylon system, where they would make their stand against the Devourers. The fleet departed with ceremony and hope. Every species in the Federation watched as their greatest warriors went forth to battle. Children on 1,000 worlds looked up at the stars and believed that their defenders would return victorious. The combined might of 11 species had never failed to overcome any threat. Jake remained on New Horizon Station, monitoring communications and coordinating relief efforts for the refugees streaming in from the Outer Rim. For 3 days, regular reports came back from the fleet. They had reached the Krylon system and were deploying in defensive formations. Early engagement reports suggested the battle was going well. Then the communications stopped. On the 4th day, a single ship limped back to Federation space. It was a Nexari scout vessel, its crystalline hull cracked and dim. The pilot, a Nexari, named Echo, was barely conscious when rescue teams brought them aboard New Horizon Station. Echo's mind was shattered, their crystal structure fractured by trauma. Through broken psychic projections, they managed to convey what had happened. The entire fleet, the greatest military force in galactic history, had been annihilated in less than 6 hours. The Devourers hadn't just defeated the Federation fleet, they had consumed it, learning from every weapon, every strategy, every defense the galaxy's finest military minds could devise. They had adapted to counter every advantage, overcome every strength, and absorbed the knowledge and power of 11 species' greatest military achievements. As Jake stared at the broken Nexari pilot, he realized that everything the galaxy had relied on for defense had failed. The Devourers were coming, and nothing the Federation possessed could stop them. The Outer Rim was gone. The greatest fleet in galactic history was destroyed. And humanity, the species everyone counted on to find solutions through talk and compromise, had nothing left to offer but empty words and good intentions. Jake looked out at the stars and wondered if this was how civilizations ended. Not with grand battles or heroic last stands, but with the quiet realization that all their strength had never been enough. The galaxy had cried for help, and its greatest defenders had fallen silent in the darkness between the stars. The news of the fleet's destruction spread through Federation space like wildfire. Jake Morrison watched from New Horizons Station as panic consumed the galaxy. Refugee ships poured in from the outer systems, their holds packed with survivors, who brought tales of horror that grew worse with each arrival. The stories were always the same. The Devourers came without warning, appearing in system after system like a plague of metal locusts. They consumed everything: planets, moons, space stations, even the stars themselves. Survivors described machines the size of cities that could reshape matter at will, turning entire worlds into more of themselves within hours. Jake found himself overwhelmed by the constant stream of emergency meetings. Every day brought new requests for help, new pleas for protection, new demands for solutions that he simply didn't have. The Federation Council met around the clock, but their discussions went in circles. Without their main fleet, they had no way to stop the advancing threat. The remaining species began to fracture under the pressure. The proud Vortani started building fortress walls around their core worlds, abandoning their outer colonies to focus on defending their homeworld. The collective pulled their forces back to protect their queen worlds, breaking their promise to coordinate with other species. The depths retreated to their deepest ocean planets, hoping the Devourers would pass them by. Even the unity that had held the Federation together for centuries was crumbling. Fear made allies into strangers, and cooperation became every species for themselves. Jake watched helplessly as the civilization he had devoted his life to protecting fell apart before his eyes. In desperation, Jake began searching through humanity's classified archives. He spent sleepless nights in the secure sections of New Horizons data vaults looking for anything that might help. Old trade agreements, forgotten treaties, technical specifications. He read everything, hoping to find some overlooked advantage that might save them all. What he found changed everything he thought he knew about his own species. The files were buried deep in the military archives, sealed behind security protocols that dated back to humanity's first contact with the Federation. Jake almost missed them entirely, but a reference in an old diplomatic report caught his attention. It mentioned something called the Sol War, a conflict that had supposedly ended before humans joined the galactic community. Jake had heard of the Sol War in history classes, but only as a brief civil conflict that humanity had resolved through diplomatic means. The official records described it as a minor disagreement between Earth and its early colonies, settled peacefully before first contact with alien species. The classified files told a very different story. Jake stared at his screen in growing horror as he read reports from Federation scouts who had observed the Sol War from a distance. The conflict hadn't been a minor civil disagreement. It had been a brutal military campaign that spanned multiple star systems and lasted nearly 50 years. Humans had fought other humans with a ferocity that had terrified alien observers. The Vortani military analysts had filed reports describing human warfare as completely without honor or restraint. They wrote about weapons that violated every civilized code of conduct, tactics that treated entire populations as military assets, and a level of persistent aggression that seemed impossible to counter. The Nexari psychological profiles were even more disturbing. They described humans as persistence predators on a galactic scale, capable of pursuing their goals with single-minded determination that bordered on madness. The reports warned that humans would sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve victory, including their own people. Jake found intelligence assessments from every major Federation species, all reaching the same conclusion: humanity was the most dangerous military force any of them had ever encountered. The Sol War had demonstrated capabilities that made other species' greatest military achievements look like children playing with toys. But the most shocking discovery was a secret Federation directive from the time of first contact. The document was signed by leaders from all 11 species and contained a single, terrifying instruction. Humanity was to be contained within diplomatic roles at all costs, their warrior nature suppressed through prosperity and peaceful purpose. Jake read the directive 3 times before its full meaning sank in. The Federation hadn't invited humanity to join as equals. They had recruited them as a potential threat that needed to be controlled. For 2 centuries, humans had been deliberately kept weak, their aggressive instincts channeled into harmless diplomatic work, while other species handled all military responsibilities. The galaxy had been so afraid of what humans might become in a real war that they had made sure humans never learned how to fight properly again. Every human military academy taught defensive strategies and peacekeeping operations. Human weapons development focused on non-lethal technologies and crowd control. Even humanity's space fleet was designed for exploration and rescue operations, not warfare. Jake felt sick as he realized how completely his species had been manipulated. Humans genuinely believed they were naturally peaceful, that their diplomatic nature was their greatest strength. They had forgotten their own history, forgotten what they had once been capable of when truly threatened. As Jake processed this revelation, emergency alarms began sounding throughout the station. Another Federation fleet had fallen at the Thylos. Nebula and the Collective's homeworld had gone silent. The Devourers were accelerating their advance, growing stronger with each victory. Jake looked at the classified files spread across his screen and made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. He activated an old communication protocol that hadn't been used in over 200 years. A military code from the Sol War era that most humans had forgotten existed. The message he sent was simple, broadcast on frequencies that only Earth's deepest military archives would recognize. It bypassed all Federation communication networks, all diplomatic channels, all the careful systems that had kept humanity contained for centuries. The message contained just 7 words, but Jake knew they would wake something that had been sleeping for too long. Humanity's children need to come home. Jake sat back in his chair and waited. He had no idea if anyone on Earth still monitored the old military frequencies. He didn't know if the message would even be understood by a species that had spent 2 centuries learning to be diplomats instead of warriors. But the refugees streaming into Federation space brought new reports every day. The Devourers were adapting to every defense, overcoming every strategy, consuming every attempt at resistance. The galaxy's greatest military powers had already fallen, and nothing in the Federation's arsenal could even slow down the advancing threat. Jake thought about the secret files he had discovered, about the careful way humanity had been contained and controlled. The Federation had been so afraid of human military capabilities that they had spent 2 centuries making sure those capabilities never developed. Now the galaxy was dying, consumed by an enemy that could adapt to any conventional warfare. The Federation needed something unconventional, something that didn't fight by civilized rules, something that could match the Devourer's relentless persistence with an even greater fury. Jake looked out at the stars and wondered if humanity still remembered how to be the monsters that had once made an entire galaxy tremble with fear. The Federation had spent 2 centuries turning wolves into sheep, but now they needed wolves again. The question was whether humanity still had fangs hidden beneath their diplomatic smiles, or if the Sol War veterans had taken their deadly knowledge to the grave. Jake's communication panel remained silent, showing no response to his desperate message. But somewhere in the darkness between stars, he hoped that sleeping giants were beginning to stir, remembering what they had once been and what they might need to become again. The galaxy had cried for help, and Jake had just awakened something that might be humanity's greatest gift or its most terrible curse. Jake Morrison did not have to wait long for his answer. 48 hours after sending his coded message to Earth, the first human ships began appearing throughout Federation space. But these were not the peaceful vessels that the galaxy had grown accustomed to seeing from humanity. Jake stood on New Horizons Station's observation deck, watching in stunned silence as a massive warship materialized from hyperspace. The vessel was unlike anything in the Federation's databases, angular and brutal, covered in thick armor plating and bristling with weapons that seemed designed for one purpose only: to destroy everything they targeted. The ship's identification came through on military frequencies that Jake had thought were long dead. It was the Retribution, flagship of something called the Sol Guard, and it was requesting immediate docking clearance under emergency protocols that predated the Federation itself. Within hours, more ships arrived. Sleek destroyers that moved through space like hunting predators, massive carriers that disgorged swarms of fighter craft, supply vessels that looked more like mobile fortresses than support ships. Each vessel bore the same angular design, the same brutal efficiency, the same clear message that they were built for war and nothing else. Jake received a message from the Retribution's commander requesting an immediate meeting. The sender identified herself as Admiral Lisa Kane, and her tone carried an authority that Jake had never heard from a human before. She was not asking for permission or requesting a diplomatic conference. She was giving orders. Admiral Kane arrived at New Horizon Station with a small escort of soldiers who moved with military precision that seemed almost alien compared to the relaxed demeanor of typical human personnel. The soldiers wore black uniforms that Jake did not recognize, with insignia that belonged to no Federation military organization. Kane herself was a woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute command. She looked at Jake with an expression that was both sympathetic and completely uncompromising. "Commander Morrison," she said, "you sent a message that humanity's children needed to come home. We received that message, and we have come home. But I need you to understand what that means." Kane led Jake to a secure briefing room where she activated displays showing star charts that Jake had never seen before. The maps showed hidden bases throughout human space, secret shipyards that had been operating for centuries, and fleet positions that revealed a military organization far larger than anything the Federation had imagined. "The Soul Guard has been watching and waiting for over 200 years, Kane explained. "When humanity joined the Federation, we knew what they were doing to us. We saw how they contained our military development, how they channeled our aggressive instincts into harmless diplomatic work. But we also knew that someday the galaxy would need what we truly are." Jake stared at the displays in disbelief. According to Kane's charts, humanity had been secretly maintaining a military force that rivaled the combined fleets of all other Federation species. Ships, weapons, and soldiers had been hidden throughout human space, maintained by an organization that the Federation had never detected. Kane's explanation was simple and terrifying. While the Federation believed they had successfully pacified humanity, the Soul Guard had been preparing for war. They had studied every species in the galaxy, analyzed their strengths and weaknesses, and developed strategies specifically designed to counter any threat that peaceful diplomacy could not handle. "The Federation made a mistake," Kane said, her voice cold as space itself. "They thought they could change what humanity is by giving us comfort and purpose. But you cannot breed war out of wolves by feeding them well. You can only make them hungry for the hunt." As Jake processed this revelation, reports began coming in from across Federation space. Human fleets were taking positions around major systems, not requesting permission but simply announcing their presence. The ships moved with coordination that suggested years of planning, decades of preparation for exactly this moment. The Federation Council convened an emergency session, demanding explanations for humanity's sudden military buildup. Jake found himself in the impossible position of trying to explain something he barely understood himself. The other species representatives were a mixture of confused, angry, and terrified. The Vortani military commander demanded to know how humanity had hidden such a massive fleet for so long. The Nexari questioned why their intelligence networks had never detected the Soul Guard's operations. The collective's representative wanted to know if this was some kind of human deception or betrayal. Kane's response to the council was delivered, with calm certainty that made Jake's diplomatic training seem like child's play. She stood before the assembled representatives of 12 species and spoke with the authority of someone who held all the cards. "You asked us to be your diplomats and peacekeepers," she said. "You made us suppress what we truly are because you were afraid of what we might become. But now your children are dying, and you need someone willing to do what you cannot. You need monsters to fight monsters. We are those monsters." The council erupted in protests and demands for humanity to explain their deception. Kane listened to the outrage with patience that somehow made her seem even more dangerous. When the shouting died down, she spoke again, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The Devourers are 3 days away from the Centauri system. Your remaining fleets cannot stop them. Your defensive strategies have failed against an enemy that adapts to everything you throw at it. You have exactly one choice. Let us fight this war our way, or watch your civilization die. The first test of humanity's true nature came when a Devourer scouting force entered the terminus system. The remaining Federation forces prepared for another defeat, expecting to see their defenses overwhelmed, just like every previous engagement. But the human response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Instead of meeting the Devourers in direct battle, the human fleet disappeared entirely, leaving the system apparently defenseless. The Devourers began their usual consumption process, confident that they faced no meaningful resistance. Jake watched the battle reports from New Horizon Station, his stomach churning as he saw the human strategy unfold. The human commanders had used the system's civilian population as bait, allowing the Devourers to begin their attack before springing their trap. It was a tactic that violated every principle of civilized warfare, but it worked. When the Devourers committed to their assault, human ships emerged from hiding places throughout the system. They did not fight with honor or follow any recognizable military doctrine. They fought like predators, striking at weak points and retreating before the enemy could adapt. They used weapons that seemed designed to cause maximum destruction with minimum regard for collateral damage. The human fleet systematically dismantled the Devourer force, not just destroying them, but studying their remains in real time. Every destroyed enemy unit was immediately analyzed, its weaknesses cataloged, its technology reverse-engineered and turned against its surviving companions. Within 6 hours, the Devourer scouting force was completely eliminated. But the victory came at a cost that made Jake sick to witness. The human strategy had sacrificed 3 civilian stations and 2 colonies to achieve perfect tactical positioning. Millions of people had died not from enemy action, but from human calculations that treated lives as acceptable losses. Admiral Kane's after-action report was delivered to the Federation Council with cold precision. The battle had been a complete success. The Devourers had been defeated, their adaptive capabilities countered by human tactics that changed faster than the enemy could respond. But the report also made clear that this was just the beginning. "We have studied your enemy," Kane told the Council. "We know how to defeat them, but victory will require methods that you have spent centuries teaching yourselves to forget. If you want to save this galaxy, you must let us become what we were born to be." Jake looked around the Council chamber at the faces of the galaxy's leaders. He saw fear, disgust, and desperate hope all mixed together. The Federation had spent 2 centuries containing humanity's warrior nature, and now they needed that nature to save them all. The vote was unanimous, though Jake could see that many representatives voted with heavy hearts. Humanity was given complete authority over the Federation's military response to the Devourer threat. The galaxy's peacemakers had just handed control to its most dangerous predators. As the Council session ended, Jake realized that win or lose, the Federation as they had known it was already dead. Humanity had awakened from 2 centuries of enforced peace, and there would be no going back to what they had been before. With their first victory against the Devourers, humanity took complete control of the Federation's war effort. Admiral Kane wasted no time in implementing changes that shocked the galaxy to its core. Within days, every major military installation in Federation space was under human command, restructured according to principles that other species found both brilliant and terrifying. Jake Morrison watched the transformation from his position on New Horizon Station, which had become humanity's primary command center. The peaceful diplomatic hub he had known for years was now a military fortress bristling with weapons and swarming with soldiers who moved with deadly purpose. Every conversation was about strategy, every decision calculated for maximum military advantage. The change was swift and brutal. Human commanders took control of alien fleets, stripping away their ceremonial decorations and honor guards to focus purely on combat effectiveness. The proud Vortani warships were retrofitted with human weapons that violated dozens of Federation treaties. The elegant bioships of the depths were modified with systems that turned their organic nature into a weapon of terror. Jake witnessed meeting after meeting where human generals explained their new strategies to horrified alien commanders. The Fortani were taught to use their fortress worlds not just as defensive positions, but as massive weapons that could destroy entire star systems if necessary. The collective swarm tactics were enhanced with human psychological warfare techniques that could break enemy morale before the first shot was fired. Admiral Kane established her headquarters in what had once been New Horizons Diplomatic Conference Center. The elegant meeting rooms where Jake had spent years negotiating trade agreements were now war rooms filled with tactical displays and strategic planning tables. The walls showed star charts marked with battle plans that stretched across multiple galaxy arms. The Federation Council still met, but their role had changed completely. Instead of debating policy and making decisions through careful consensus, they now received orders from human military commanders and implemented them without question. The species that had once ruled the galaxy together were now junior partners in humanity's war machine. Jake found himself struggling with the moral implications of what humanity had become. Every day brought reports of tactics that violated everything he had believed about civilized warfare. Human forces converted entire civilian populations into military assets, turning peaceful colonies into weapons production centers and recruiting children into combat roles. The transformation extended beyond military strategy. Human scientists were redirected from peaceful research to developing new ways to destroy the Devourers. Mining operations throughout Federation space were restructured to produce weapons instead of consumer goods. Trade routes became supply lines for an ever-escalating war effort that consumed everything in its path, but the results were undeniable. For the first time since the crisis began, the Devourers were being pushed back. Human forces did not just fight their enemies. They hunted them across multiple star systems, pursuing retreating Devourer units with a persistence that seemed almost supernatural. The human approach to warfare was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They did not fight for glory or honor, but for complete and total victory. When the Devourers adapted to human weapons, humanity created entirely new categories of warfare. When the enemy evolved new defenses, humans developed strategies that made those defenses irrelevant. Jake watched reports of battles that lasted for weeks, with human forces pursuing individual Devourer units across vast distances just to ensure they were completely destroyed. No enemy was allowed to escape. No technology was left for the Devourers to study and adapt to. Humanity fought with a thoroughness that bordered on obsession. The other species struggled to understand human methods. The Honorable Vortani were horrified by tactics that prioritized victory over warrior pride. The collective-minded Nexari could not comprehend humanity's willingness to sacrifice individuals for strategic advantage. The peaceful Etherians were traumatized by the level of violence humans considered necessary and normal. Admiral Kane led the war effort from the front lines, her flagship Retribution becoming a symbol of humanity's unleashed fury. She coordinated attacks that spanned multiple star systems, orchestrating military campaigns with a level of complexity that the Federation had never thought possible. Her strategy meetings lasted for days, planning operations that would take months to execute and required the coordination of millions of personnel. Jake found himself both impressed and terrified by Kane's efficiency. Every human decision was calculated for maximum military impact, regardless of moral considerations or diplomatic consequences. Refugee camps were converted into recruitment centers. Peaceful research stations became weapons development facilities. Even humanitarian aid was distributed based on strategic value rather than need. The climax of humanity's campaign came with Admiral Kane's announcement of Operation Nexus Strike, the most ambitious military operation in galactic history. Instead of continuing to defend Federation space, humanity would launch a massive offensive directly into Devourer-controlled territory, aiming to destroy the enemy's command structure at its source. The plan was audacious beyond belief. Human forces would punch through the Devourer lines in a coordinated assault, involving every available ship and soldier. They would strike at the heart of enemy territory, targeting the massive construct that served as the Devourer command center. located in a system that had been consumed early in the war. Jake listened to Kane's briefing with growing horror. The operation would require sacrifices on a scale that made their previous battles look like minor skirmishes. Entire human colonies would be abandoned to provide the resources needed for the assault. Millions of soldiers would be committed to an attack that might not succeed, with no possibility of retreat or rescue if things went wrong. The other species begged humanity to reconsider, to find a less costly approach. But Kane's response was delivered with the same cold certainty that had marked every human decision since they took control of the war. The Devourers must be eliminated completely, she said. Half measures will only allow them to adapt and return stronger. This enemy gives no quarter and shows no mercy. We will respond in kind. The Battle of the Nexus began with the largest hyperspace jump in recorded history. Human fleets emerged simultaneously in dozens of systems, overwhelming Devourer defenses through sheer coordinated aggression. The assault was so massive and so sudden that even the adaptive enemy was caught off guard. Jake monitored the battle from New Horizon Station, watching as tactical displays showed the progress of humanity's greatest gamble. Human forces carved through Devourer territory like a blade, destroying everything in their path with methodical efficiency. When they encountered resistance, they did not attempt to overcome it through conventional means. They simply destroyed the entire system and moved on. The fighting lasted for 3 days and nights, with human forces pushing deeper into enemy territory than any Federation unit had ever managed. They fought with a ferocity that seemed to grow stronger as the battle continued, as if the violence was feeding their determination rather than wearing them down. When the human assault finally reached the Devourer command construct, the battle became something beyond conventional warfare. Admiral Kane led the final assault personally, using weapons and tactics that permanently altered the fabric of space itself in that region. The Retribution and her escort ships fought their way through defenses that should have been impossible to overcome. The victory was complete and devastating. The Devourer command structure was not just destroyed but completely erased, leaving behind only empty space where their greatest creation had once existed. For the first time since the war began, the galaxy experienced true silence from the enemy. But as reports of the victory spread throughout Federation space, Jake realized that the cost of humanity's methods was becoming clear. They had saved the galaxy, but they had also become something that no other species could coexist with as equals. Humanity was now too powerful, too aggressive, and too willing to do whatever was necessary to achieve their goals. The galaxy was safe, but it was safe because monsters now stood guard over civilization, and those monsters wore human faces. With the destruction of the Devourer command structure, Admiral Kane announced the final phase of humanity's war against the galaxy's greatest threat. What she called the Terminus Protocol would hunt down every remaining Devourer construct across the entire galaxy, ensuring that not a single unit survived to rebuild or adapt. Jake Morrison watched from New Horizon Station as humanity prepared for this final campaign. But something had changed in the weeks following their victory at the Nexus. The humans around him no longer spoke of returning to their old diplomatic roles or restoring the peaceful Federation they had once known. They spoke only of completing their mission and ensuring that threats like the Devourers could never rise again. The Terminus Protocol was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human forces divided into thousands of hunting groups, each tasked with tracking down and eliminating individual Devourer units that had been scattered across the galaxy after their command structure fell. It was not enough to defeat the enemy. Humanity intended to erase them completely from existence. Jake discovered the true scope of humanity's transformation when he read the classified details of the protocol. The plan required converting entire human populations into living weapon systems, transforming peaceful colonies into military production centers permanently, and restructuring human society around the concept of eternal vigilance against galactic threats. Children born during the war would never know peace. They were raised in military academies from birth, trained to see the galaxy as a hostile environment that required constant monitoring and control. Human art and literature became focused entirely on warfare and victory. Human science was devoted completely to developing new ways to destroy potential enemies before they could become actual threats. The other Federation species watched this transformation with growing horror. The humans they had known for 2 centuries, the diplomatic, mediators who solved problems through compromise and understanding, had ceased to exist. In their place stood something that even their allies found difficult to recognize as the same species. Admiral Kane's flagship Retribution had become the mobile headquarters for a military organization that spanned the entire galaxy. From her command center, she coordinated hunting operations that tracked down Devourer remnants with ruthless efficiency. No hiding place was too remote, no fragment too small to escape human attention. Jake found himself increasingly isolated as one of the few humans who remembered what their species had been like before the war. His diplomatic colleagues had been replaced by military strategists. His peaceful negotiations had become tactical planning sessions. His role as a mediator had transformed into something between a translator and a hostage negotiator, helping other species understand humanity's new nature. The Federation Council still met, but their discussions had become exercises in managing humanity rather than governing the galaxy together. The other species knew they owed their survival to human military power, but they also realized they could never return to the equal partnership they had once enjoyed. The final battles against the Devourers were not grand conflicts, but systematic extermination campaigns. Human forces would arrive at a system, identify any remaining Devourer presence, and eliminate it with methodical efficiency. They did not negotiate, did not offer surrender terms, did not take prisoners. They simply destroyed everything connected to their enemy and moved on to the next target. Jake received reports of planets being completely sterilized because they contained Devourer technology. Star systems were abandoned because human commanders deemed them too contaminated by enemy presence to ever be safely inhabited again. The galaxy was being saved, but it was being saved according to human standards that other species found terrifying. When the last confirmed Devourer unit was destroyed, in a remote system near the Galactic Rim, Admiral Kane called a meeting of the Federation Council. Jake attended as humanity's representative, though he no longer felt like he understood what humanity had become. Kane's announcement stunned the assembled delegates. The war was over, she said. Every Devourer construct had been eliminated. The galaxy was safe from the threat that had nearly consumed civilization itself. But her next words changed everything. The Federation as it existed before this war is finished, Kane stated with the same calm certainty she had shown throughout the conflict. Humanity can no longer pretend to be what we were. We have become something that your species cannot coexist with as equals. The other species erupted in protests and pleas. They begged humanity to return to their old diplomatic roles, to help rebuild the peaceful galaxy they had all once shared. But Kane's response was delivered with finality that left no room for argument. We have seen what lurks in the darkness between galaxies, she said. We have fought enemies that adapt to everything civilization can throw at them. The galaxy needs guardians who are willing to do what others cannot, who will watch for threats that peaceful species prefer not to think about. Jake listened in shocked silence as Kane outlined humanity's decision. Rather than risk future conflicts with their former allies, humans would voluntarily exile themselves from Federation space. They would establish their own territory at the galaxy's edge, becoming the guardian species that protected civilization from external threats. The human exodus began within days of Kane's announcement. Massive colony ships departed for the Galactic Rim, carrying millions of humans who had been transformed by war into something their former allies could barely recognize. The peaceful traders and diplomats who had once been humanity's face, too. The galaxy were replaced by soldiers and strategists who spoke only of duty and vigilance. Jake faced an impossible choice. He could leave with his own species, abandoning the Federation he had served for decades, or he could remain as humanity's final representative to the galaxy they had saved. Admiral Kane made the decision for him. Someone needs to stay behind, she said. Someone who remembers what we used to be, who can help them understand what we have become. You are the bridge between what humanity was and what we are now. Jake accepted the role, knowing it meant spending the rest of his life explaining humanity's choices to species who would never fully understand them. He watched from New Horizons Station as the human fleets disappeared into the void beyond known space, carrying with them the weapons and knowledge that had saved the galaxy. The Federation began to rebuild, but they did so with the knowledge that, somewhere in the darkness, humanity watched and waited. They were no longer the galaxy's diplomats or peacekeepers. They had become its apex predators, patrolling the space between galaxies to ensure that threats like the Devourers never reached civilized worlds again. Years passed, and the galaxy learned to live with the strange peace that humanity's exile had created. Trade resumed, diplomatic relations were restored, and the trauma of the Devourer War slowly faded into history. But everyone knew that their safety depended on creatures that had once been their friends, and were now something much more dangerous. Jake received his final message from Admiral Kane 5 years after the Exodus. It was brief and typically direct. New threats emerging in the Andromeda Spiral, humanity deploying to intercept. The galaxy sleeps safely tonight because monsters stand guard in the dark. Jake read the message 3 times before deleting it, from the secure channels. He looked out at the peaceful stars of Federation space, where children played on safe worlds and diplomats solved problems through careful negotiation. It was a beautiful, civilized galaxy, protected by the knowledge that somewhere beyond the rim, humanity hunted things that would devour everything these peaceful species held dear. The Federation had cried for help when faced with extinction, and humanity had answered that call. But the price of salvation had been the transformation of their protectors into something that could never again be part of the civilization they defended. Jake Morrison, the last human diplomat in Federation space, continued his work as translator and guardian of memory, helping the galaxy understand that sometimes salvation comes not from angels, but from devils willing to damn themselves to save others.